So with that, I'll give it over to the Splunk folks. So we have Julia, Paul, and Tony, and they're going to talk about hands-on workshops and how they use that as a means to enable their engineers to do their best work. So take it away.
Hey everyone, so thanks for the intro, Marco. So today, Tony, Paul, and I will be talking about learning labs, and we internally market these as workshops. So you might hear us use those terms interchangeably, but to get us started, Tony's gonna give us a little intro about learning labs and the impact they've had here at Splunk.
Yeah, fantastic. So I'm so glad to be part of this event because Rajan from LinkedIn invited me, and ever since then I've gotten a lot right from the community. So we want to give back. So my name is Tony Tam, like Julia mentioned, and I've been working on building tools and training for existing engineers and new engineers at Splunk for the last 5 years. So our bootcamp is a 3-day event, 3.5-day event for engineers. It consists of talks and these learning labs. So back in 2016, when Paul joined my team, we were using Confluence. So I think like many others, we used Confluence because it was easy, it was there, but we found it very lacking in many ways, right? There's no analytics, there's no interactivity. Engineers didn't really love workshops, so it was kind of a drag to get them to use it. The authors didn't also love like authoring for it. So when Paul and I sat down to think about how to make the bootcamp tutorials awesome, we have 3 goals in mind. One was engineers have to love it. So as users or as authors, we have to author in Markdown and use the same pull request workflow. It has to have analytics built in, right? Splunk has our product, which is our bread and butter is analytics. So it has to have analytics built in from the start. And then the last thing is it has to be singular focused on a tutorial style content, and engineers can learn something after. So this is some data for just our bootcamp track. We use the workshop platform for many other things, but for the bootcamp track, there's 14 workshops. We measure by NPS score, which is Net Promoter Score, 53, which is really high, I think, for content. And then for a total of 2,000 people who used this product for the last 2 years. And we have a total of 118 workshops created by other engineers. So next slide. Just some screenshots again. This is a Splunk dashboard, right? Every single workshop has a NPS score and has how many people have gone through it. The one that every single engineer uses is learn how to use Splunk, which has an NPS score of 60, which is again like pretty high. Next slide. And while we love positive feedback, we actually love negative feedback even more, right? So I sort that rating by reverse order, so you can see what people are complaining about. So that's actually feedback for the authors to say like, hey, this is actually broken, right? We can fix it. So that's it. I'll pass along to Julia.
Yeah, so now that Tony has given us kind of like a broad level overview of the impact and the motivation for the workshops, I'm going to talk a little bit more about like the workshops themselves. And so just to get back to the motivation, I think in the tech sector, we hear or things are always changing. Best practices, the tools, we constantly need to be learning new things. And so I'm sure everyone in this room has heard one of these questions or some version of these questions before, like, how do I learn more about X, Y, or Z tool? Or maybe someone at the leadership level will say, all engineers need to learn about X, Y, or Z. They need to learn about accessibility or Kubernetes. And these tools are constantly changing. And like Tony mentioned, the practice of using like Confluence pages or kind of static content isn't a great way for engineers to learn new things and like practice those skills. And so, at Splunk, we do have documentation across Confluence and Google Docs and GitLab pages and READMEs. And like you said, it was hard to find. Engineers don't love it. People don't love writing that documentation because it's not super engaging. And then it's also just like, it's really hard to find information when you need it. So for example, as a new engineer joining Splunk, if you're trying to learn how to just like download all the tools you need to get started, it's really hard when you don't know where even to look for that information to begin with. And so like Tony mentioned, he and Paul came up with the idea for workshops. And so this is a centralized learning environment where we have all sorts of content about all things learning. And so there are a lot of benefits of using Workshop over like Confluence or Google Docs. One of them is what I mentioned, like having everything in one place. This makes it easy for new engineers or even existing engineers to kind of like know if they need to learn something new, they can immediately go to Workshop as like their first stop. And this will be a great landing ground for them to learn that information and maybe move on to something more complicated in the future. Secondly, we have, I'll talk about this a little bit more in depth later, but we have verification tools built into our workshops that lends to a more active learning environment. So all educational studies show that active learning is more effective than passive learning being kind of like just reading content or like scrolling through a page of words. And so that's not a really great way to learn. And so a big part of creating Workshop was creating these active learning tools that allow engineers to like verify that they're learning the skills that the workshop is trying to teach. And then as Tony mentioned, Splunk is really big on analytics. And so I'll show a little bit more about how we leverage like metrics to encourage users and authors alike to kind of like improve the content and kind of keep interacting with it even after the content is like created and posted on the page. With that, I'm going to do a quick demo about what Workshop is all about. And so this is our homepage. As Tony mentioned, we have over 100 workshops on the page contributed over the last 2 years, which is really incredible. And so a great place to start with Workshop is the tracks page. And what's really nice about this is that this allows administrators or workshop creators to organize all those workshops into kind of like a structured environment that allows users to walk through it and kind of have some guidance through those different workshops. So one example we have is the bootcamp workshop. And so you'll see we have it separated into days. And so then when engineers are onboarding and going through bootcamp, they kind of know where they should be. And it's really easy to visually see that. We also kind of like separate it out into like for technical roles. And so that way people who aren't coming into a technical role know that they can, just skip over that part. And so this makes it really easy to organize for learners. From here, we'll go into a workshop. And so I'm going to go ahead and open the Create a Workshop workshop. So it's the workshop that teaches people how to use workshops. But why I want to open this workshop is because I want to show you the verifier component of our workshops. This is what I mentioned about like creating the active learning environment. And so we have a bunch of different verifiers that are built in that users or that creators can use in their workshops. And so we have things like quizzes. And so this is like all written in just a YAML file. So it's really easy for the author to organize this. And then we have demos on this page of like what these all look like. And so you can see once the user goes through the workshop, they can answer these questions. If they get the wrong answer, they get that like immediate feedback that tells them that, something's wrong. And then after they go through all these, the quiz one will make sure that they have to get everything correct before they can move on. But then we have other verifiers as well. We have a scripted verifier where the author can write like a custom script that verifies the user's answers. My favorite verifier that we have is this custom code lab verifier. And so as an engineer, it's always useful to practice the coding thing I'm learning when I'm learning it instead of just like reading about it. It's totally different to like write code yourself than just to see an example. And so here we have we support a bunch of different languages. Here we have a Python example. And so it says, write a function called +1. And so we can go ahead, +1. And so I'm just going to go ahead and do this. And let's say I'm going to do this incorrectly first. So let's do +2. And when we run this, you'll see we get the error message that kind of says, okay, what's going wrong? Well, it's the incorrect answer. I guess this error message isn't super helpful. For more complicated tasks, the authors would be encouraged to provide kind of more helpful error messages so the user has some more guidance on what's going wrong. But then if we go ahead and just add the correct answer here, you'll see we get the verification that it's correct. And so this just makes it really nice because the workshops can support all sorts of different content. We have it's just super customizable in this way. You can add as many verifiers or as few verifiers as you want to your workshop. And it makes it really nice because it gives users, like I said, that immediate feedback in terms of whether they've learned the material sufficiently or not, which makes it a lot nicer than just reading the material and not really know if you got like the content that the author intended you to get out of it. And from there, yeah, so like I mentioned, some of the things that make learning labs or workshops unique is that we have all of those resources in one place. The validation options help users understand that they've learned the material sufficiently. And then being able to group all the lessons together in a cohesive track is really nice. It also allows you to kind of repurpose the same workshop in multiple contexts. And so that way you don't have multiple forms of the same documentation floating around. So for example, if like different teams all want their workers to like learn Kubernetes, we can write one Kubernetes workshop and insert into multiple tracks. And that way, not every team has to author their own Kubernetes workshop. You can just insert that one workshop into multiple tracks and have multiple teams leverage that information that already exists. And then the dashboard insights that Tony referenced earlier is really effective in terms of like giving us insight into how effective that learning platform is. Let me go ahead and share some of those dashboards. I know Tony gave us some screenshots, but I'm going to go ahead and share some more specific like overall views. So we do have like the overall statistics, like what Tony was showing about like we've had 2,000 users over the last 2 years. This here I have like a 3-month view right here. So we have 206 new users or 274 new users over the last 3 months. These are probably mostly new hires who are getting onboarded onto the platform through our onboarding workshop. But I think one of the most interesting views we have is the author view, because this gives authors some insight into how effective their content is helping other people within our organization. And so as an author, so I have authored 4 workshops, and 4 of those workshops are active. Active meaning someone has engaged with them over the last 3 months. If I had any inactive workshops, they would be listed here. And then as an author, if I see an inactive workshop, that gives me some context into that, maybe that workshop is out of date, or for some reason it's not being used, and I should either promote it or improve it so that other people are finding more use out of it. And so that gives authors information about, who's using their workshop and like when they should maybe improve their workshop or update it in some way. We have total number of engagements, NPS scores, and feedback. And so one thing we really want to focus on with workshop is we want to make the authorship experience rewarding for the author. And so giving them this feedback and giving them this like high level overview of just like overall impact of their workshop, we hope encourages authors to continue giving back to the platform even after they make that workshop. So it seems like my workshops are doing pretty good right now, pretty positive feedback. But if there were negative feedback here, that could be a great indication for like ways I could improve my workshop to like make things better. And so often we will actually take these feedbacks and create like Jira tickets for them so that we are able to improve them and continue iterating on them to make sure that our content continues to be relevant and helpful for existing users. And so I hope that gives an overview of the whole process from both a user's point of view as well as kind of an author's point of view. In terms of how Splunk leverages workshop, we've already mentioned how it's a key part of our onboarding bootcamp. Over the 3 days, we have new hires go through the trainings, and then Tony will also lead live like debugging sessions. So if new hires get stuck at some point, they can easily ask for help and kind of get unblocked in that live session. We have team-based onboarding. So like I mentioned, teams can create their custom tracks. And so when they have new hires onto specific teams, they can easily have an organized workflow for kind of getting ramped up onto that team. It's also a great way to do org-wide training. Earlier this year, Splunk had to do like a source code compliance training that all engineers had to complete, and using the dashboards and those metric insights to help kind of keep track of who completed the workshops was really, really helpful in that specific case. And then tech talks and sharing new tools. This is one thing that workshops are great for. You know, if someone gives a really interesting tech talk, people always want to learn more and they want to get hands-on. And so pairing tech talks with like a hands-on workshop is a really great and effective way to like share new skills across our organizations. And now, so this has been a product that we've used in Splunk over the last 2 years, and Paul King has done a lot of work recently to open source this project so that other people will be able to use this product as well. And so I'll pass it on to him to talk a little bit about this effort.
Yeah, so the Learning Labs is now open source to GitHub, and anyone can download the source code and play it. But that's also a kind of limitation that you only have the source code. So we need to do a bit more work to make it a seamless experience for the authors when they want to create a new workshop, because before we open source, we had to rely on lots of internal resources such as NPM registries or Docker registries that only exist within the Splunk. So we have to now put those tools to public registries like a public NPM or public Docker registry so that you can use it and out of box. You can go to the next page. Yeah, as I mentioned, so we only publish the source code. If you're interested, you can go and run it and try to build it by yourself. But if you want to wait, then you can actually wait until the utilities are ready and publish it to the public space. And once those utilities are ready, then you should be able to do authoring much easier. And then also the next roadmap next thing I would like to do on the roadmap is that like we had the Learning Labs instance within Splunk, I wanted to host a public instance of the Learning Lab so that anyone can try to contribute or can play with it, so that it'll be serving as a demo environment so that people can play with it. And then the next thing is that I'm gonna mention a bit more on next page, but then it's currently hosted on a single host. I'm not sure if everyone knows what it means, but so basically it means if one machine somehow dies for maintenance, so people have to suffer from it. So but then we didn't have much issues for past 2.5 years, so it's been running fine. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best. So we probably would like to support a bit more stable environment for the Learning Labs, but that's planned for sometime next year, because I have to put my own time there. Next page. So so these are only the key technical dApps that we have with the Learning Lab. So hope that if you can, or you or your colleagues can contribute to the GitHub and fix some of those things, it'll be really nice. Because I already mentioned that everything is containerized. That means we distribute everything as Docker images, but then currently the design only supports a single host deployment, so that if the one machine dies, then everything dies. So hope that that can be improved. And also we support, as Tony mentioned earlier, that we support generating the workshop using Markdown, but we use the doc generation engine called the Gitbook, which is somewhat outdated and it's kind of slow. So it takes a couple seconds. It's a couple seconds, it's not that bad, but then the latest tools will build a new doc in a second or less than a second. So there are better tools that we can probably use, something other than Gitbook. So it's an area that needs some improvement. And also for anyone who wants to improve the user interface, we use React for the UI, but it also comes with some legacy code, so that the development experience might be somewhat different than other people may expect, because it's not only single page application, so something is different. So we need to fix or make this better so that developers can improve the user interface easily if they want to make any changes. I think now I'll hand it over back to Julia.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So hopefully this presentation got you excited about maybe leveraging this tool at your company. So like Paul mentioned, there are a lot of things that we would love to improve. And as 2-3 engineers, we can't do it all ourselves. And so it'd be awesome as you decide to like implement them yourselves to maybe also add some improvements. We'll open it up for questions and answers, or I guess questions now, but to kind of provoke discussion, we had a couple discussion questions ourselves. And so we wanted to put these out there. And the questions are, how does your company handle hands-on learning or kind of like this tutorial style learning? And then I saw some people ask the second question in the chat already, but that means it must be a good question if we all have this question. And the question is, what strategies do you use to keep learning content up to date and also to promote content authorship and maintenance? So yeah, I'll open that up if anyone wants to take those on. And then we're also happy to take on any questions that the audience has.
Thank you. Thank you, Splunk team. And there was also a couple of questions about how does this integrate into LMS LXP, or do you even care about integrating with HR systems, or is this just engineering only sort of?
Yeah, I can try to answer that. I think when Paul and I first started this, we were very allergic to traditional LMS systems just because we've been exposed to so many, and engineers don't like the compliance nature of LMS. So we chose not to do any integration. So anyway, so I don't know if I'll offend anybody, but we decided to stay away from any kind of compliance must-do type of LMS systems, which we do have, right, at Splunk.
Makes sense. So it's a grassroots engineering effort, essentially. Yeah, very cool. And so
the attendance, actually, I wanted to talk about that. So with the attendance, because we're running the boot camp, there are people who may do these workshops outside of regular boot camp. So we actually created a module called Bootcamp Check-in. And it has a sort of a secret in there that we only tell you when you attend the workshop. So that's how we kind of know who is there. The second part is because the purpose of bootcamp is to help the engineers themselves. If they chose not to do it, that's fine. So again, we only take attendance, but we don't necessarily track completion. We expect you to find it useful. If you don't, then that's fine with us.
Got it. And there are a few questions about, the theme is sort of like, how do you motivate engineers to create content, maintain content, keep it up to date, right? Like what did you discover works for you?
Yeah, I'll jump in, and then Julia, I think you should come in. We use what Paul and I used to do, and Julia sometimes too, is we will send them reports of how many people have used it, what their feedback is. I found that to be really useful, right? To give the authors back. So I would email their manager and the engineer to say that, hey, last week, 50 people used your workshop and here's the feedback, right? That's one way we can do it. We haven't built in the automated system yet to do it because it wasn't really scalable that I would do it manually. So that's a missing piece, but we believe that the more we can tell the authors about the impact of their work, the more the authors will keep it kind of up to date. That's one theory. The second thing is Jatin, who's from my internal documentation team. What we're trying to do is have multiple owners of a workshop. So a workshop should never be single person owned. So that's the second part. But I don't think we have the problem solved, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And that's kind of why this question exists on our Q&A page, because that's not a problem we have solved. And we'd love to hear kind of like as a community, how other people are tackling this problem. I think one other thing, I saw someone ask, we have 2 or 3 engineers for this platform, but how many writers do we have? We have Jatin on our team, and he started it earlier this year, and he's helped actually convert some like existing Confluence workshops into this workshop platform. And so that's been a great effort on his part. But otherwise, we have a lot of writers just from all across the org. So people who are sometimes tech writers, but sometimes just engineers contributing. And I think that's actually a great signal that people see the value of this and they want to contribute. And I think a great way of kind of encouraging that is the more content we have, the more useful it is. And then the more people want to contribute more content. And so it's kind of like this weird cycle. And so at the beginning, I know Paul and Tony were actually creating a lot of workshops themselves. And so Paul Kang is the author of like 20 workshops, which is awesome. And that kind of got the ball rolling just in terms of showing the usefulness of this platform. And as people started coming to the platform, I think they naturally wanted to like improve it and add their own resources. The part about like maintaining the workshops, like Tony said, we try to like keep in contact with authors and give them feedback so they kind of are aware of how many people are using it and the impact they're having. And we hope that that information motivates them to keep their content up to date. However, we do have a problem when authors switch teams or if they leave the company, we have a problem where well, then they're not really our source of contact and it's hard to kind of keep that information up to date. And so we've been trying to kind of create a like multiple owners sort of structure where we have multiple people responsible for updating the content. And that way it's a little bit more equal in terms of like if someone leaves the company, we're not just relying on that one person. But that's definitely something we're still kind of trying to figure out in terms of like how best to structure that ownership.
Got it. And there was a question that Stuart asked earlier, which is about self-paced versus, I guess, live learning. So is this a single player experience? Like I'm just logging in and doing this myself, or is this sort of like a live experience where there's a community of people participating in, say, like a workshop or a class?
We're experimenting with both. Right. So like we only have a US-based training team here. So for people in Poland, in UK, they're left to their own to work through these. And then they would come to a central Slack channel to report problems. And then Julia, me, and Paul, we just monitor the Slack channel to help them. That's one way we do it. Second way we do it is even for the US, we're experimenting with just like, hey, we'll give you back your Zoom fatigue time. Why don't you work on these things yourself in the US? And then report problems on Slack. And then again, like I would be there to help. We are trying a third way, which is for me to host 2 hours, right? Where everybody's on Zoom together, everybody's doing the same workshops. And then Julia built this real-time dashboard where, you know, we kind of gamify a little bit. And then I'm just there to unblock people. So we experiment with all of them. Depends on our bandwidth, depends on how many people. Sometimes we have 2 people in a boot camp. Sometimes we have 70. So like it's a different range. So sometimes we would just make a decision like, hey, this week we're going to do totally kind of offline. But this week we'll do live because they're all interns. They need more help. So we'll switch. So no one answer for that question.
Mm-hmm. And Stuart had a couple more questions about sort of like, what do you sit organizationally, right? So I get it that you're probably in engineering, but then does Splunk also have sort of some kind of L&D team? And what's your interaction, if any, with that team? How do you like kind of manage that? And one way to look at that is from end engineers' point of view, right? Like what do they go for onboarding? What do they go for ongoing development sort of thing?
Yeah, I'll try to answer the question. Engineering learning, it's actually really kind of bootstrapped. It's very, I would say, underfunded. So Julia and Paul, they actually don't work on the workshop full time. They actually spend almost 0 time working on the platform because it's really stable, but we are focused on other tooling for engineers. In terms of education, L&D for engineering, it's really 1.5 people for a 2,000 people organization for engineering. And then there is a larger corporate L&D, which is again underfunded for like 6,000 people organization. And then there's a field organization that has a much larger L&D organization. I hope that answers the question, but we're kind of bootstrapping, on the L&D side.
Got it. And so a couple of questions on the tool side of things, right? So Jasmine asks, how did you make up the build versus buy decision. Sasha's asking like, well, if you're gonna look at existing tools, did you consider Code Lab from Google, which is also freely available?
Yeah.
And then sort of a follow-up question on like, how do you manage in the tool itself? How do you manage authoring and versioning and all that good stuff? So a couple of those questions.
Yep, totally valid question. Totally valid question. We looked at Microsoft Labs publicly. We looked at Google Labs. I think Google Labs was done in Google Docs when I first looked at it 4 years ago. They were authoring Google Docs and they did this conversion, and none of them had any interactivity. I mean, at that time when we looked at it, meaning all the stuff like polling, question and answer, this ability to extend the platform with any code to validate anything. I mean, that feature, I don't think exists anywhere unless I'm missing it. Maybe somebody can tell me. And then the other part is we couldn't go to a SaaS provider either because the stuff that we're writing is pre-release code, right? Or teaching is pre-release thing. So we couldn't put it into a SaaS provider tool either. So we didn't go and look at a SaaS provider, something like Pluralsight, right? Other tools. So this was 4.5 years ago when we did the evaluation. We're happy to evaluate again. Now that we open sourced it, I'm sure people will come to us like, hey, you should check out XYZ, but we're happy to look at that. On the other side, if you look at the investment, it's really Paul Kang's investment for about, I would say 6 months. One engineer, 6 months, you get the platform running, maybe 2 interns to add a few more features. I think Julia joined us as an intern. Julia joined us as a full-time. But the investment was very small. It was very small. One engineer, 6 months, and then ongoing maintenance, and that was it. Rather than go and buy a third-party tool, again, where developers didn't love it, right? So, and then it didn't have the built-in Splunk analytics. It was that trade-off that was pretty easy to make a decision on. And then in terms of the workflow, everything's through a pull request. So however you want to make changes to the code is how we make changes to the workshops. So that was easy. There's no new workflow involved.
As a side note, I believe that Lyft, Jen Gilbert at Lyft took a similar approach of allowing you to code, put a code in sort of the documentation / onboarding material, and then have it auto evaluated. So we've seen bits and pieces of this before. So yeah, very cool. So any other questions from the community?
I've got a question, and my typing isn't as fast, but when you broke everything up by roles, how important was it to have the roles be quite specific in terms of non-technical, beginner, intermediate, and advanced?
I think we didn't try to break it up by like intermediate, beginner. We were trying to do it by job role. For example, performance engineering is a very specific role. And the performance engineering team actually wrote 5 workshops just like 3 months ago, because they have very specific things they want a performance engineer to do. SRE, right? System Reliable Engineering, is a very specific role. So we did role-based versus level-based training. Does that help?
That does, thank you.
My question kind of builds on that a little bit, which is when you think about the topics, what's driving the topics that are being created, it seems clear that if someone wants to go do something, or if there's a need, then they go do it. But have you had any efforts on sort of polling or asking, engineers or leaders, what are the skills that you need now or that you see coming, to be a little more proactive about than going out and creating the workshops for those? Just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think we could do better on that side, Chris. Yeah, we've just hired a principal program manager to do exactly what you just said, Chris. I think we underinvested in that part in terms of getting the necessary skills and then building content for that. So that's a part where we can do better. What we've been doing, given the 1.5 people we have, is we know exactly what we must have, which is like, you must learn Splunk and you must learn SignalFX. You must install, your basic tooling. You must have Docker installed. You must know Kubernetes, right? Those basic things. And then, like you said, Chris, we should uplevel a bit more. And that's something still in progress.
I'll ask the typical questions of metrics, like what do you typically measure? And I know you mentioned NPS and you mentioned something around attendance, but not completion. What's your sort of like North Star metric for measuring success of this?
Marco, you mean as the platform or as bootcamp?
As the program itself.
As you mean the workshop,
Yeah.
the workshop platform?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We like to look at contribution. Actually, that's the part where now we're trying to look at is actually how many people outside of our core team is contributing content. That's the North Star metric I think we want to do.
Got it. So creators, cool, makes sense.
Yeah, creators. And by the way, I'm going to clarify what Julia was saying. We really did have one internal technical writer. All workshops were created by engineers, except the 2 or 3 that Jatin, when he first joined us, right, joined us like a few months ago, started creating. So that's the metrics that we're continuing to drive, which is how many other engineers are creating content.
Got it. Stuart had a question, so I'll just pass it on.
Yeah, first off, my compliments on putting it together. It looks like what I'd like to give engineering, which is very nice. It's like, what's the other, like that is the look in the organization. Could you take me through, if I wanted to experiment with this and be like, can I run this here locally from your open source project? Thank you for doing that, by the way. Could you maybe speak a little bit like, what are the steps to doing that? I consider myself like unafraid of getting into things of GitHub, but I haven't used GitHub before. But I've done scripting and coding before.
Oh, fantastic. So I actually had a post on LinkedIn about this, 3 lines. You basically clone the repo, you run a make step, you just type make, and then you type make run. So 3 steps, and then you have a local environment. From that point on, I think, Paul, you can speak up too, but you can clone a second repo, which becomes, you can author. So again, git clone, and then you make a run, and then you have a command line that you can start authoring. But that's like how I see it, and I tried it this weekend, it worked. But Paul, if you can add anything to that.
Yeah, I think you can start your local environment for the portal that hosts all the workshops easily. But the problem might be authoring part, because we had an internal, a very tiny utility that was hosted in internal npm registry that you can actually wrap around Docker. And if you're already familiar with the Docker and how to run a Docker image, then you can actually type in those command line, the commands on the terminal. But then that utility is kind of missing at the moment. So that's why you have to build a Docker image for the authoring tool by yourself, and you have to run the Docker image by yourself, and by knowing all the Docker commands. So that might be a bit of learning curve, if you want to do it by yourself.
But Stuart, we open sourced this mainly because also Paul wanted to contribute outside of his work hours. Feel free, when once we share the deck, feel free to ping him also on GitHub or on the TechKnowCon Slack. He's also over there to try to help. We just open sourced it like 2 weeks ago, so it's kind of brand new and fresh for us. But we'd love to see other adopters trying it. And if it's not delightful for you, I think Paul and I will both fix it in our off hours.
And those missing tools that I mentioned will be coming soon.
Cool. I tried to quickly find it on your GitHub. I couldn't. So if you don't mind, maybe just copy paste the GitHub URLs right in the chat, so it's easier for people to get to that README that Jasmine is asking for. Oh, cool. Oh, learning, got it. Learning labs. So that's the one. Cool. Any other questions? Anybody wants to ask anything else? Feel free to just speak up. So yeah.
I had a question about the workshops. Are there any workshops that have been open sourced along with this, in addition to the tool?
We're going to open source the create a workshop. So I think that would be the best one. But yeah, that's the one we're working on now.
That's awesome. And I know you had some questions that you posed in your own slides around maintenance. I think you mentioned something about kind of letting folks know how their workshops are doing, and I'm assuming this is helping drive, like, close the feedback loop and encourage them to maintain it. Are there any other strategies that you've all employed to sort of, encourage more maintenance and make sure these workshops stay relevant and fresh?
I can try to answer that first. One thing that, yeah, I think closing the feedback loop is a big one. Sometimes it's honestly just the old trick of not harassing people, but almost harassing people. I think also just getting more people to use the workshops. One thing that we found is when Tony started doing the like 2-hour live sessions and people were going through the workshops and like really diligently going through them, a lot of people had kind of like more specific feedback that we were able to share with authors. And sometimes if the authors didn't want to pick up those changes, Tony, Paul, or I would just make the changes ourselves and kind of address the individual feedback people had. Paul, Tony, not sure if you want to add to that.
No, I think nothing else. I mean, I guess I'm just thinking out loud, right? That we are treating workshop as code. It's the same thing, right? If you have people who are like not taking care of the code, it's the same thing as workshop. It's the same challenge and same problem. But the nice thing is that the workflow is a pull request. So, sometimes we would make a change and we would tag, right, the original author to review it. So it's kind of the same workflow. It's nothing new. It's the same challenge. I don't know if we can solve it necessarily that easily, that differently. It's a constant struggle, I would say.
Got it. How hard is it to learn? It sounds like there's almost like a mini set of like a domain specific language or something to like introduce those validations and tell people if they got it right or wrong. So how hard is it to pick that up and be able to author a workshop?
It's really two custom things, right? One is this book.json, which is the JSON format. It just describe, the learning platform, what verifiers there are. So it's just JSON. It's well documented in the create workshop. The second is a YAML file, right, for simple validation, for polling, question and answer. So that's kind of custom, but it's a YAML file. The third, in the custom verifier, it could be any language you want. It could be any code you want. So you can write in Python, JavaScript, whatever you feel like, because the way Paul has designed it is it's the validator runs inside a container, a Docker container. So anything that can run in the container, I think can verify. Did I get it right, Paul? Okay.
Yes. To be exact, there are two different ways of running the code. We have something called one just the JavaScript code, and there is something called the code lab. That is a new feature that allows running anything. So, yeah.
Got it. So it sounds like it's fairly flexible and fairly easy to pick up for anyone with basic sort of engineering skills, right?
Yeah, we had actually Jatin's here, but we had other two technical writer contractors who added the validation. Like we had an effort to add validation to every single workshop. So, I mean, they picked it up. I think Jatin, you also wrote validators as well.
Yeah, just to add to what others are saying, I was able to create a workshop probably within an hour or two of using and reading the documentation and playing around with a test workshop. So it has a small learning curve. It helps if you know about how JSON works and how YAML file works, and obviously GitHub. But once you pick up that, it's pretty straightforward.
I have a question, if you don't mind me asking a technical question to Paul, since you mentioned you can run anything. Are these workshop validators stateful, meaning like, can they build upon each other like the way, I don't know, like a notebook can, or they sort of like they run something and that's it? It's like a little, almost like a unit test running in its own context.
Well, it's all up to the designer, because it gives access to the local disk. So if the author wants to make it stateful, you can leave some information there so that it can probably use it later for the next verification. And I think some of the workshops, especially I think built by the security team, they even made a workshop that the workshop interacts with the EC2 instances outside, so that they had a bunch of workshops that interact with something else, but they also had a other interactivities that require some of the statefulness. So I think it's totally doable, but we are not really guiding through certain patterns or certain ways, directions, but then it's kind of very open-ended. So, but
yeah,
as long as
the product security one was super interesting. They had 8 workshops, and what they had was capture the flag, right? So you break this, you have to figure out how to break a system as a hacker, and then you have to repair it. So that was the most comprehensive workshop we've seen, and it's because of the author's passion, right, for trying to drive security learning. That was just an awesome set of 8 workshops that he did.
So thank you for that. I was just going to ask, like, I know that in the past on this community, we talked about like these sample projects and sort of like for onboarding, like, toy projects, but can these workshop validators kind of be built so that they build on top of one another? So you're kind of like almost building an app of some sort or through the course of a workshop, as opposed to just testing individual pieces one at a time.
Yeah. Paul, is the prerequisite stuff working? I think it was.
Yeah, it works. So I'm not sure if you're asking the reusing other workshops in the code wise, or I'm not exactly sure what the question is.
Yeah,
but then
more like, can it be a tutorial style, like you're starting with nothing and you're working towards some larger whole at the end that is sort of composed along the way through these validations?
Oh, I see. That I think it's not the kind of style that we ever tried. So it's basically it's another idea that the authors have to kind of try. So basically, let's say let's build the website. So that means so you want you're asking that that workshop will actually make the working live website, but then the workshop will also guide through the verification, right? Is that your question? Yeah, we never had that use case, and we never had that, but I think totally possible, but requires some efforts.
Yeah, so I think, Paul, you added this idea of a prerequisite where one workshop depends on another. I think that's how I would design it. If you want to build a complete website, but that takes 5 steps, right? We want to make the workshops small enough so that people accomplish something concrete, and then you chain them up together into a track is how I would do it myself.
And also in practice, if you want to make something that is working, sometimes we have to fit in users' credentials. Let's say if a user wants to create a Git repositories, wants to spin up some instances. So that actually requires tying the environment with the user-specific credentials sometimes, and sometimes tokens. It has some kind of the variable storage per user basis, so that the workshop may utilize that, but we never had that advanced in workshop uses cases. No one really actually came up with the actual workshop. So with that, I'm saying that still we probably have to have one single use case that then maybe I can drive or see that the workshop is capable of what you described. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
One question I have is sort of like, if you think holistically about a new engineer onboarding at Splunk, what part of that onboarding experience is done through workshops, and what part is done through other means, like live learning, buddy system, mentorship, like whatever other tools you have in your toolbox to onboard somebody?
Yeah, so again, like, because our team is centralized for 2,000 engineers, we only focus on what every engineer should know. And then from the first 3 days, it's like every engineer should know XYZ. They should install, they should get access to GitLab. They should install Docker, Kubernetes. They should use Splunk. From that point forward, we do hand them back to the receiving team. From there, most receiving teams use Confluence, unfortunately. So that's how, that would be the next step for them.
So part of it is centralized and part of it is localized to a specific team. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions? Anybody else? Anything else they want to ask?
I had a quick one, if you don't mind me asking another one, and it's about like non-engineers. Like, do you have anyone outside of engineering using this? And if so, what's been their experience?
We do invite a lot of people into our engineering bootcamp. So we invite PMs, product managers, program managers, technical writers, designers into bootcamp. We also believe everybody is in Splunk should install and use Splunk, right, to build a dashboard, just to understand the product. So Alexander, I think we have a lot of, and I didn't break this down, by the way, Julia can do this for me in the future. My guess is 20%, 15 to 20% of people coming from non-engineering, right? Because the platform itself, to use it is pretty simple. Right, it's just marked down and then left and right, completed. And for something like Splunk 101, we actually we don't want you to open the terminal. We actually have UI tools for you to install and install Splunk. So you can basically do some of our tutorials without ever hitting the terminal. So I don't know if that helps you. We do sometimes have to cater to the non-engineer audience, which is fine, right? Yeah, I hope that helps. To author, I think it's super challenging if you're not a tech writer to try to author something, because you have to open a pull request, right? You have to mostly use a command line. So tech writers are totally fine with it, but I've not seen a non-technical person try to author. And that's not our audience when we design it.
If no other questions, I was going to say thank you. Thank you, Team Splunk. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for open sourcing this and giving it back to the community. Super awesome. I'd be excited to see who else adopts this and how well it works out. So yeah, it's promising.